Right, so the Women's Rugby World Cup, you know what, personally for me, I found the group stages really interesting. I mean, some games are good, like you had USA versus Australia. Honestly, that game was ridiculous. I'd watch that many more times over. And we also had Scotland versus Fiji, which was a decent game. But anyway, let's get started into the video. So, here are my takeaways from the group stage of the Women's Rugby World Cup. Now, looking at the stadiums where England played, I think it was really interesting that they played at different stadiums across the country. I mean, when we see England teams hosting like such major tournaments, they always play at Wembley or if it's the rugby side, Twickenham, and I've got to think to myself like there aren't only England fans in London, like they're England fans across the country, so why not put England in different spaces? I get statistics works well for the team, so they wouldn't have to travel as often, but still, it's important to give fans who aren't from London a chance to experience the England team, and that's one thing I've liked here. Like we've seen England versus USA in Sunderland, and we've seen England versus Australia at Brighton, and we've also seen England play Samoa. Did I play Northampton or somewhere? I can't remember. But anyway, yeah, it's key that fans who aren't from London experience the England team. Yeah, and that's why it was important to see England moving around the country rather than just staying at Twickenham. Also, the fact that England didn't play at Twickenham I find it really interesting because it keeps Twickenham, what's the word, sacrosanct. Like Twickenham should just host the final rather than England games. Yeah, but what are your thoughts on that? Looking at England's final game against Australia, as well as the final round of group games, I think for me it'll be fair to say that the England game against Australia, that was our first proper test, and we saw a sneak preview of what was to come for the knockouts. Like, to be brutally honest, England weren't really tested against the likes of USA and Samoa. I mean, England just swept the floor with both of them. But with Australia, England were like truly tested, and not just England, but New Zealand were tested, even though they beat Ireland like 14-0. Like, I don't think I watched the New Zealand game against Ireland, and I really don't think the scoreline shows the reflection of how the game went. Because Ireland were better than what the scoreline suggested, and although I didn't watch the Canada, Scotland, and France v South Africa games, I'd like to think that both France and Canada were also tested, because it's important that the big four nations in women's rugby are tested. But yeah, I did only watch England versus Australia and New Zealand versus Ireland. But for those of you who watched Canada versus Scotland and France versus South Africa, what did you make of those games? Would you say that the likes of Canada and France were tested? Like, what are your thoughts? Another thing that's come to mind is bowl and plate matches. Now, why aren't they a thing at this tournament? Like, rather than the teams that didn't make the knockout stages just go home, like, give them something to play for. Like, for instance, who wouldn't like to see USA versus Fiji or Samoa versus Wales play in bowl and plate semi-finals? Like, for me, that's something I'd like to see, and that's also something that other rugby fans would also like to see. Like, give the teams that didn't make the quarters, like, have them play for something still. Like, I know we see like bowl and plate matches at the sevens tournaments, but why not at 15s tournaments? Like, World Rugby, like, why don't you give smaller nations something to play for at least? I don't know. Honestly, I don't. I really don't know. Right, going into the quarterfinals, I saw a post from the official Rugby World Cup Twitter account, which is this. Like, I've got to think to myself, a rivalry reignited. New Zealand versus South Africa is not a rivalry. Yes, it's a rivalry in a men's game, but in the women's game, it's just not. New Zealand are head and shoulders better than South Africa in every department. Yeah, South Africa may give it their all, but New Zealand will comprehensively beat South Africa. Like, this happens in football as well, where they'll take a, a big men's game and give it to the characteristics of the women's game. For instance, Manchester City versus Manchester United. Yeah, I'm sure it's a big game in a men's game, although given their places in the table, well, I'm sure it's probably not, but whatever. But in the women's game, it's nothing. It really is nothing. Like, for me, I don't understand why they do this. Like, seriously, New Zealand versus South Africa. I'll say it again. It's not a rivalry in the women's game. It's its own thing. Like, don't bring what's in the men's game over in the women's game, because the translation just doesn't make any sense. But that's just my take on that. Lastly, the intro. Like, I'm sure some of you have seen the Rugby World Cup intro, and for me, it's just disappointing in a sense that it doesn't really have anything to do with England at all. Like, in an intro for a major tournament, the intro is meant to have the characteristics of the country. Like, if you look at the 2019 Rugby World Cup intro, yes, you could tell that was taking place in Japan. And if you look at the intro for the 2023 tournament, yes, you knew that was taking place in France. Yet, if you look at the intro for this year's Women's Rugby World Cup, looking at some of it, you'd be thinking to yourself, okay, where's this tournament taking place? And for me, it just doesn't make any sense. Also, why didn't the BBC do their own intro rather than taking the intro from World Rugby? I don't get that. Honestly, I really don't. But what are your thoughts?